Observability as how it's been practiced to date is dead, meaning that no one cares about looking at dashboards when everything is green. Stop treating observability as a static image that you need to monitor. Monitoring is dead.
Welcome to the podcast dedicated to the art and science of observability. This is Signal Over Noise.
So this is our first episode 0. That's right, we are zero indexing. And for our first episode, I couldn't think of anyone better to have with us than Rob and Sven Cowart, the co-founders of ElastiFlow. Rob and Sven, welcome.
Yeah, hey Sara, good to be here.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So being our first episode, I thought it'd be really fun to go back and share the origin story of ElastiFlow. Rob, can you roll back the clocks for us?
Yeah, this always ends up being a little bit of a story that is different than most people expect, and I get this question a lot. Not so much from the average people on the street, more or less, but, being a startup, we talk to investors, we talk to all kind of other folks, and they always ask, so what made you do this? What was the revelation or the insight? And the reality is there was none. I actually, kind of the genesis goes all the way back to the mid 2010s, really. If you think about, there was this emergence of all these new data platforms, right? Like streaming platforms, search engines, document stores, time series databases, et cetera. And, I've spent pretty much my entire career in what now we call observability. We used to just call it network monitoring or network management back in the day. But I started to wonder how could some of this new stuff be used in the market or the area that I work in, network? And so started playing around with some things. And one of those experiments was I put flow data, hence the flow and ElastiFlow, network traffic records, into a search engine, which happened to be Elasticsearch. And basically in a weekend had something that, while it didn't scale great and it had some, less than optimal experience, what it provided on insights was already better than what the company I was working for had. Fast forward a couple months, it was putting the data in Elastic. So I went to this Elastic meetup to kind of talk about the thing and some other experiences I had messing around with the stuff. And someone says, that's kind of interesting, because I had done a demo. And I'm like, that's kind of interesting. Is that available for download anywhere? And I'm like, nah, but let me see what I can do. And a couple weeks later, I actually had put it on GitHub, and I had shared in the meetup, hey, this is where it's at. You can download it. It's something like, I think you can see on the page there, it's something like 3,100 and something days away. And so I shared that, and I think it was probably about 3 or 4 months later, I happened to be in Switzerland. I was going to be speaking at an event, and I'm sitting there in the hotel room. My wife had traveled with me, and I'm like, man, my GitHub repository got like 30 new stars on it in the last couple of days. And so I had no idea why. A little bit later, I had learned that a guy named Nick Baraglio, who was at ESNet, might still be actually, I'm not sure. He had posted a blog on NetFlow tools and did a shout out to ElastiFlow as kind of like this upstart honorable mention, and it just kind of took off from there. And even to this day, although that original GitHub repository is not maintained really anymore, it's still, if you search for NetFlow on GitHub and sort by stars, it's still the number 4 repository out of like 900 plus repositories. So it is without a doubt true to say, I stumbled into this thing. And once it was clear, the community grew pretty big, and it was clear that this was resonating. The approach to solving the problem was resonating with people. I was like, well, I know what to build, but I'm going to be honest with myself. I'm still developing as a developer. And so I need a pro. And Sven was the pro that I knew the best due to obvious relationships. And I reached out to him and said, let's do this thing. And we got to work on it and founded the company in latter 2020 and launched the product GA in March of 2021. We'll be 5 years here in a little over a month. Yeah. And it's been quite a journey so far. I actually joke to people all the time around meetups. I'm like, hey, you get a chance to speak at a meetup, take it. You never know when it's going to be a life-changing experience.
Never know.
Can't believe it's been 5 years already.
I know. I'm like, the thing to me is I'm like, Wow, I have been 100% responsible for my paycheck. Even though in the beginning there was no paycheck, I've been 100% responsible for my paycheck for 5 years now, which, is sometimes a scary thought. But as the company grows, it gets to be even scarier because I feel like I'm also responsible for the paychecks now of our team members. It's kind of like, hey, knucklehead, don't screw this up. But it's been quite a journey for sure. I feel like that ElastiFlow as a story really has like 3 chapters so far that we're just starting to write the third this year. Chapter 1, obviously, its time as a GitHub repository and a project around that. For anyone out there that's thinking, I have some ideas I could throw up on GitHub, I do want to warn you, it's basically working for free if you do it right. Interestingly, one person who in a way had some influence on this happens to be Shai Bannon, who was the founder of Elastic. I happened to hear him speak about something when he was talking about open source and stuff. And he's like, when you do an open source project, you're kind of making a social contract with the community that you're going to be there for them. So that was kind of my approach with the original project, and it worked out fairly well, I think. Became fairly popular in that regard. But then we made ElastiFlow the company. We knew that it resonated, but it wasn't, let's face it, it was a science project. There's no other way to say it. And so we had to rewrite it to be enterprise scale, production quality, have a lot of features and things that were otherwise missing on the original technology foundation. So we rewrote that from scratch, relaunched the ElastiFlow as now still at a community version, but as a commercial product, but really still focused on those original NetOps type use cases. So, but a lot's changed in 5 years. Like you say, Sven, it's amazing it's been 5 years, but a lot's changed in 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
yeah, converting that to tech years, what does that equate to?
For sure. Like some things
like
I can
dog
think.
years times 7.
Exactly.
Oh, right.
Yeah, 35 years, really.
Tech years equals dog years, more or less. So that's not incorrect. I do feel like 5 years in tech is like 35 years in other industries,
Absolutely.
But so, yeah, we were really focused still on those NetOps use cases. But when we got started, like, okay, people were doing APM was starting to come around. Open tracing was starting to be a little bit interesting, but surely no one was thinking about things like open telemetry. Is that going to be something? Yes, there were the first, very first GPT models that people were playing with, but they weren't available, really openly available. It'd still be a couple years yet until, ChatGPT caught everyone off guard. And now obviously we're all thinking about things different in that perspective. And so when we look ahead to what does chapter 3 start with, right? I think there's a lot of these changes that are impacting the way not just network operations or network observability is going in the future, but just, IT infrastructure observability, period, and the directions it's going, and are going to have a pretty big impact. And that's kind of where the next chapter starts is, okay, like, what's ElastiFlow going to do with this new emerging reality that we've seen over the last year or two, And I think we got a good plan there. It's actually one of those areas where I'm glad I partnered with Sven, quite frankly, because, I didn't come up as an engineer. I was more on like the sales customer focused side. I was, of course, very technical, but I wasn't a software engineer on a daily basis. I hadn't deployed cloud solutions at all, which Sven did. So I think it's true to say that early on, I probably connected more with a lot of the customers we were talking to. But as we move into our next chapter, I kind of feel like, Sven may be passing and catching and passing me in that regard as we start to think more about DevOps use cases, how network relates to it, and that kind of stuff.
And I think that's true, but I think that the physical infrastructure is always going to be relevant and necessary to be managed. So I think it's more going to be a situation where these responsibilities are going to be blurred. The lines are going to be blurred between who manages what and what you have to worry about.
I think that's true. Actually, I kind of kicked myself. I have to try to find this, but literally like 2 days ago, I saw some post on LinkedIn that someone on my network had posted, and he was on a customer site, on a job, on a service job or whatever, as an IT guy. And he shared a picture of a 3Com, for those that are listening that are like, who's 3Com? Well, back in the 90s, they were,
Talk
might
about
have
tech
been
years.
one of Cisco's primary competitors, right? So a 3Com token ring hub. Now, for those that don't know what token ring is, there was a time, like in the early 90s, when the big debate was, who's going to win, token ring or Ethernet? Which one is better? So we're talking about a 30-year-old piece of equipment that actually was just plugged into a whole bunch of spaghetti of wires coming out of a wall, like really, really a mess. But it just shows you, like, you're right, Sven. I mean, the physical infrastructure, it stays around forever. People switch out servers pretty quickly, but if you bought a 1 gig switch 20 years ago, okay, the new stuff probably uses a lot less electricity, maybe has a little bit nicer management user interface, but you could still plug a couple dozen wireless access points into that thing and serve a campus of Wi-Fi without a problem, right? So it just tends to be a lot more legs on the network side. So we're not going to lose, or the need for the legacy stuff's not going to go away for sure. It's just a question of, when is that horizon going to get closer where that stuff starts to really fade into the background?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the positive things that we've seen there, even in the last 5 years, is the development of tools that will help automate configuration changes on, for example, Cisco switches. Cisco DevNet, right, has developed the Terraform providers to manage Cisco device configuration using Terraform, which is really more a cloud concept, entirely started as a cloud concept to use Terraform and ISC principles, and now being applied to the legacy or physical network layer. And I think the more we see of that, the more too that you'll see these two worlds collide more and more and come together, and the lines will be blurred between who needs to manage what.
So that's a really interesting point. And I know we talk about, responsibility of the network and passing blame, is the app, is the network. When it comes to connectivity, who is responsible for the network and for everything that connects to that network?
Which network?
Yeah, exactly. Like we had this internal thing, some internal cartoony graphic that someone made that basically had a bunch of DevOps people, and the boss was saying, congratulations, you're all network engineers, which very much nowadays has some truth to it. When we think of the emergence of overlay networks, et cetera, the problem is surely, though, that to a lot of those folks on the DevOps side, the physical network is just a dumb pipe. And to the physical network folks, all of those encrypted tunnels and things from your CNIs and the like is just a bunch of, unknown noisy traffic that we don't know anything about, type of thing.
Over the network, are you saying that teams need to maybe come together and start collaborating as opposed to pointing those fingers?
I mean, surely start to work more closely together. Organizationally, whether they want to be part of the same group, that's a whole other thing. I think every organization is going to be different. If they don't start collaborating more, I do increasingly think that that's going to become more challenging for organizations. I mean, when you just think of the demands on availability, performance, the experience that's expected of the network, nowadays, like, every organization relies on it so heavily, even ones you wouldn't think of. Like, we have a very large customer and they do facilities management. Like, would you think of a facilities management company of having a major, huge network, but they're a large organization and the global infrastructure is pretty significant. We have another one that's like a paper company. And so you don't think of these as tech companies, but yet their infrastructure is sufficiently important to the business that they're looking for these types of insights, right? It's not just the fancy high-tech organizations that care about this. It's kind of everybody, And now let's just go back not that long ago, the what was it, AWS? I don't want to throw anyone under the bus that's not, but the DNS related outage that, it was Cloudflare. I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry, AWS. I didn't mean to say that was you. the Cloudflare scenario. DNS issue. I mean, it happens, and DNS services move across the network. We actually can see that in ElastiFlow, if anyone cares about that, to be able to understand the ratio of requests to responses has changed in an anomalous way. Someone needs to look at that or people are going to start complaining, And you just see how many businesses kind of end up standing still when something like that happens, right? And it's increasingly important to a lot of organizations. They don't have time to waste on a week of blame game on whose fault is it, right?
Absolutely. Now, Sven, I'm curious to get your input here from the DevOps side of things. We talk about developers needing to be network engineers now. How do you get started? How do you get that visibility into network side of things when traditional frameworks like Melt Framework, for example, doesn't really look at network? Where do you start?
So I would like to look at history and just recognize that history likes to rhyme. And what I mean by that is if you look at DevOps, what was DevOps? DevOps was an evolution in how people utilized data about applications that were being deployed, right? So you had developers and then the ops folks standing up infrastructure for those developers, and they were looking at data in different databases and different observability tools, and they didn't share the same tooling, and they also didn't share the same deployment and automation pipelines. And so what I would say led to the DevOps revolution was realizing that that's very inefficient, and that inefficiency bred in a whole market of tools that these people then use to come together. And now it's just considered a function or a role of a SRE or a production engineer and of a software engineer. Software engineers are DevOps folks just as much as an SRE is a DevOps folk. Like as a software engineer, you can't really be considered a senior software engineer unless you know how to use Docker and build Docker images and use Docker to deploy things, and then how to use Grafana to troubleshoot your application. So a lot of these observability tools and orchestration tools is kind of the middle ground for where these people met. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing already, where I already brought up like Cisco DevNet, where that is purely infrastructure people saying Ansible scripts are probably not the right way for me to manage my device configuration at scale, and we need something better. Well, DevOps community already has that better tool, which is Terraform and the concepts around IAC. And so what I think is going to happen, and we're not there yet, this is a slow move, and it's particularly slow because of the rate of change in the physical IT space. I guess dog years don't apply to that space. So they move in human years, unfortunately. But you sent me a podcast where there was 4 network engineers that I listened to about a year ago talking about the adoption of Ansible. And it was just crazy. The spectrum was, one person said, no, I don't ever touch it because it just makes my job more complicated. And the other person said, I don't do anything but Ansible scripts anymore. And the other 2 were somewhere there in the middle. And so, that was last year. I'm sure it hasn't changed that much since last year on that front, but you still have people that haven't adopted these tooling. But anyways, what I'm trying to get to is that I think we're going to see more and more of the evolution of those tools than people coming together in the space. And I think that's where a large opportunity is for us at ElastiFlow, and things that we're looking at is how can we better represent what's happening for NetOps folks inside of, for example, DevOps tools and traditionally thought of DevOps tools, right? And to the point of, for example, OpenTelemetry, I challenge you to go find semantic conventions that properly and adequately represent the data points that NetOps folks wants to see about their physical infrastructure. They don't exist. And that's kind of the problem. So if they, for example, want to look at the same pane of glass, well, then they're going to need to share the same database, like what happened in the DevOps evolution, but also understand that means that the data that is being produced by either side of the equation here needs to be able to be mapped and related together. And if we can't get there, but we're going to get there, I think, in the next year or 2.
I'm going to say we're going to get there one way or another.
Well, sorry, we're definitely going to get there. We'll see.
We're going to get there. But to the credit, though, I will say, not to be like finger pointing on anyone in OTEL, we've been doing a lot of conversations there, and I think that all the people participated in that project have been very, I say with open arms. Now, maybe to some degree, it's like finally some people that understand network, Please, yes, we'd love.
Yeah, I think it's more of that, right?
We'd love to do it. Yeah,
they've asked numerous times for contributions in the past, but they just didn't get the domain expertise, and I think that was the issue.
What I think is going to be interesting in that regard, it just popped into my head. I was thinking, like, you know this, Sven, like my thing for years, I've done SNMP for an eternity. A lot of people, because of ElastiFlow, they think of me as like, well, Rob's like the flow guy. Actually, way before I touched Flow, I was the SNMP guy. And so I might even know that in more detail than I know Flow, quite frankly. I mean, not a lot of people can tell you, oh yeah, 1.3.6.1.2.1.1.2.1. I think it's 3 is if type, But anyway, so like I know that stuff pretty well. And I have been hearing about the pending death of SNMP for a long time. Now, I will say this. That old 3-com token ring switch I mentioned earlier supports SNMP for sure. So like, I don't think it's going away anytime soon. However, I did think streaming telemetry came around. And, as in those early days of that, it was like, all right, this could replace SNMP. However, it's failed miserably. I don't think we can say anything other than that. I mean, I think at this point, I wouldn't even call that a hot take. Like, streaming telemetry has failed. And I think it's failed for one reason. First and foremost, no standardization whatsoever. You have Juniper has their JTI. F5 has some stuff they send in JSON packets. You have the old school streaming telemetry, which is like SFlow counter samples. Cisco has like 3 flavors themselves. I mean, they can't even get on the same page, within their one organization. So, okay, I admit Cisco's not like, they're like 7 organizations and one logo, but nonetheless. But I think the reason it's failed is no standardization. Like SNMP was successful because there were standards around the payloads, around the data structures, about the way you express information. And streaming telemetry just like abandoned that whole thing. I guess I don't know if the vendors didn't want to work together or what happened, but open telemetry like reopens this door. So if we can get the right semantic conventions into the open telemetry project for network, there's an opportunity now, and hopefully customers will then put the pressure on vendors to adopt it, to be like, all right, you guys got to change all your streaming telemetry to be OTel network, metric signal with network semantic conventions or something like that. And we might actually see streaming telemetry have a rebirth around a standard like that. And finally, other than that 30-year-old token ring switch in that picture, SNMP gear could maybe start to disappear. Right. But we'll see. I mean, I think I could imagine that being a path that takes.
All right, let's get some more hot takes. What do we need to stop doing in 2026?
What do we need to stop doing? Man, I should have prepped for that one a bit more. I would say, what do we need to stop doing? Even though this is new technology, I'm going to say we need to stop thinking that a chatbot interface with a human initiated prompt is going to be the savior of observability. That's number one. I would say. One of the great benefits of having more normalized semantic conventions, schemas, that type of stuff, is that now we have data that we can easily share, can easily be understood, can more easily be analyzed. And quite frankly, I'm not looking to ask my AI assistant bot, can you tell me this, or that about my network? Don't get me wrong. I do believe there's some value in that. I always say we kind of I've observed 2 types of users of platforms, not even like ElastiFlow, just other through my career, other tools I've worked with. And you tend to have 2 types of users, the ones that love all of the detail and information, and the ones that are overwhelmed by the detail and information. And there is definitely a certain value in allowing that later group to say, as something as simple as, what the heck is this dashboard trying to tell me? So I think that's totally good. But what I'd like to see and believe it's kind of the next step we have to do is where an AI agent isn't something I query as we go, but I have all kinds of analytics. By the way, of which AI is just one type. There's plenty of other tools to use, but we have all types of analytics that culminate in the AI or whatever you want to call it, popping up and going, sending you a Slack message and being like, hey man, I found something. You really got to come and look at this. Do you want me to do XYZ? Like trigger some of those Ansible things or whatever that Sven was talking about and actually, take some action. But when are we going to get to AI initiated? I think that's the next path that I'd like to see. And that's, I know it's a little bit off topic from the merger of NetOps and NetOps and DevOps, but I don't care which one of those organizations you're in. That's the one thing I'd like to see stop in 2026 is chatbots.
Yeah. So I'm going to piggyback off that. My hot take, observability is dead, which it's kind of, I don't actually mean that, but observability as how it's been practiced to date is dead, meaning that no one cares about looking at dashboards when everything is green. We care about seeing data when something is red and remediating or taking action against whatever is causing that signal to show you something is red. And so, yeah, what do we need to stop doing? Stop treating observability as a static image that you need to monitor. So I'd say like monitoring is dead. What we want to move towards is, and I've been joking about this internally, like actionability over observability. What actionability is not a market, not even a concept that people discuss, but all of these advancements in AI are going to lead us to a space where observability is all about taking action and not just looking at the pretty dashboard that tells you everything is good.
Observability is a verb and not a noun.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just had to laugh as you were saying that, because as soon as you said joking about it internally, like it was your own word, I just had this flashback to Talladega Nights with shake and bake. That's trademarked. Anyway, sorry, totally off topic, but my brain just went there.
Rob and Sven, thank you so much for joining. Really loved having you on the podcast today. Next time, we will be reporting from Cisco Live in Amsterdam. Really excited to share some of the things that we're hearing on the show floor from the keynotes and what we think about it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Certainly look forward to continuing this. Hope to, continue to grow the audience and get to, over time, hopefully get to talk to some of the people that might be listening to this at some point. So thanks, Sara. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to talk.